Welcome back. We're going to end the show today with the second part of my conversation with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who came to Ottawa today to open an Alberta office near Parliament Hill. She also came out swinging against the federal Environment Minister. You said something really interesting in your press conference today that I wanted to pick up on. You basically said Stephen Guilbeault is an ideologue. I get along with the Minister of Industry. We get along really well, but I don't with Stephen Guilbeault.
Correct.
And you kind of intimated that you want him out. Has anyone in the federal government ever sort of insinuated to you that that is a possibility? You're not the only premier to kind of muse about his prospects.
Look, I had hoped that I'd be able to find some common ground with Minister Guilbeault. It's why I agreed and actually suggested that we put together a table so that we could work through these issues and see if we could get to a target of 2050, which is our target in Alberta. We think we can be carbon neutral by 2050. We're already making some great strides on building a hydrogen economy. We've had partnerships with the federal government, with Air Products Hydrogen Net Zero Project, Dow Chemical Net Zero Petrochemical Project, as well as Heidelberg's Net Zero Cement Project. And so we're going to continue working on those things. We also have a working group to talk about small modular nuclear, and if we'll be able to roll that out. Capital Power has indicated they want to do that. So I would say that there's lots of common ground. And as we've been going through this process, we've seen that the federal government has lost a number of court cases. They lost on the Impact Assessment Act. They lost on the plastics ruling. They lost on the Emergencies Act, all pretty well at the root of the same root problem, going beyond their authority. And the problem that we have is that as we've been having this discussion, Stephen Guilbeault's acted like none of that's happened. He's announced an emissions cap on oil and gas. He's announcing emissions caps on methane. He wants to get to net zero on a power grid that's also outside the Constitution. He wants to phase out combustion engine vehicles. That is not collaborative federalism. If anything, he should go and look at what the court said. Collaborative federalism means you cannot legislate in another area of jurisdiction that is not your own. You have to negotiate these things. He doesn't do that. And so because he's acting in the way he is, in a lawless way, unconstitutional way, I think it's pretty clear that the relationships broke down with him, and I would like to see him removed, yes.
On the idea of it being lawless, they would contend, and they would point to, that it isn't, and they would point to another Supreme Court decision, and that is around the carbon price as informing their ability to do things like set an emissions cap or set out an net zero electricity grid by 2050, because it involves the imperative of mitigating climate change. Have you received legal opinions that do show that the federal minister and the federal government are acting, as you have characterized them, lawlessly in pursuing, for example, the emissions cap?
Yep. I would tell you that the court decision on the carbon tax was a very narrow decision. And they actually do say that in the judgment, that it applies to this particular regulatory framework and should not be taken to apply to other regulatory schemes. And so I would say that the most recent decisions of the Supreme Court saying, stay in your own lane. The federal government has its areas of jurisdiction. We have ours. There are areas of overlap where we have to engage in cooperative federalism. The principal word there is cooperative, and I don't see much cooperation coming from the department of Stephen Guilbeault.
Do you have signs from any other ministers who you said today, hey, there's some that I do get along with? Anything behind the scenes ever communicated to you that they are willing to be more bendable on some of those targets than the environmental minister has indicated?
Well, I would hope that they would now understand that they've got to have a balance, that emissions reduction is important. We think it's important. That's why we set a 2050 target, and we've partnered with a variety of companies on a pathway to net zero, including our oil sands producers with their Pathways project. But we also know that reliability is important. We almost had our power grid fail a couple of weeks ago, and we've had 14 near misses in the last 18 months. We have to keep the lights on, because if you don't have the lights on and the furnace working in minus 35 weather in Alberta, people will die. And then we also have to deal with affordability. And I would argue that part of the Liberals' current trouble in the polls is that all of these decisions that have been made have been layering on the costs on everyday families, and is creating an affordability crisis. All three of those things have to be dealt with at the same time. And that's what we're trying to propose, is a very pragmatic, reasonable approach that balances those. And I would hope that they would do the same thing.
Okay, Premier, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time today, as always. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.